So this is my review for the score for Ready Player One by Alan Silvestri. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this video that I do with all of my soundtrack reviews. I'm going to go through each of the best tracks of the score and then give my overall opinion and feedback on the score as a whole and then rate it out of 10. So before we get going, I'd just like to preface this review by saying I may be a little bit biased towards the score. Mainly because the 80s style action soundtrack that this score is, like Back to the Future and Indiana Jones, is my absolute favourite style of music ever. I adore Back to the Future, it's my favourite score of all time. And this score for Ready Player One is very, very similar in tone and sound to scores of that era, of the 80s, and that's done deliberately. But as a result, I'm biased quite a lot towards it, because it's exactly the style of music that I love. So, just bear that in mind. I will be saying some negative things about the score. It's not going to be all the score is the greatest thing ever, because it isn't. But, yeah, just bear that in mind when you're listening to my review. So, this score is fantastic. I mean, there's no other word for it. It is exactly the kind of score that we need right now. Massive action, epic orchestral score in a world of synthetic orchestra and scores like Hans Zimmer's and things like that. I'm not saying Hans Zimmer scores are bad, but they are kind of synthetic. You know, they're not really orchestral, or they don't have a lot of soul. Whereas this does. This sounds like one of those really memorable scores from the 1980s. I mean, I was born in the 90s, so obviously I didn't experience this era, but I would imagine people came out of the cinema and could, recall the soundtrack for whatever film they went to see, whether it be Indiana Jones or Back to the Future or Star Wars, and, they'd be humming that as they came out of the cinema, or, they'd love it. It would be really, really memorable, and that is one of the major reasons why I love scores from that era, because I think they're amazing. I love the scores and the movies. I think the 80s and 90s were the best times for music and for films. And this soundtrack is a massive callback to that kind of time, and it's amazing for it. It's a callback to a time when orchestral music was, doing the rounds in cinema, and yeah. And a lot of memorable and amazing scores came out of that era. And this is basically shines a massive beacon of light on them and on scores of that time. As well as standing on its own as a pretty damn good score with a pretty good main theme, but I'll get onto that in a bit. So we'll start this off by going into the best tracks of the score. So I'm going to start off the track reviews by doing something a little unusual. Because usually I do them in chronological order, from track 1 to track 30 or whatever. But I'm not going to do that this time. The first track I'm going to review is track 21, the main theme for the film. Now, as I say, having not seen the film, I don't really know why the main theme is track 21 of 22. It seems like an odd placement for a main theme, but maybe it's just how it is in the film or something like that. So the main theme is the biggest part of the film. It's constantly referenced throughout the score, and it's pretty damn great. It also happened to be released 2 weeks before the actual score, and got me really, really excited when I first heard it, because it was exactly the kind of music I was hoping for. A massive orchestral, memorable theme. Not quite as good as Back to the Future or Indiana Jones, not quite as memorable and on the level as those kind of scores, but not far away either. Put it this way, I can remember it now, and playing it for you guys in a second here. But it's a really, really nice theme, and it has a lot of callbacks to James Horner and John Williams' scores, as well as callbacks to Alan Silvestri's own scores. It uses a lot of motifs and bits and pieces from them to create a really superb, memorable, and frankly just nice main theme. And it's not the kind of music we get nowadays, and it's a really nice breath of fresh air just to hear that kind of music again after so many years. So I'll play you a little bit of the theme now, and then get on with the rest of the track reviews. So, with the main theme in mind, I'm going to start off the next track review in chronological order now. Track 2, Hello, I'm James Halliday. Now it starts off by using a very, very classic, evil piece of music. I don't know what it is called or what it was made. I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. But, yeah, it starts off with that, so instantly you get an idea of what's going on. And it then builds up into a really nice, soft version of the main theme for the film. As I say, that main theme is constantly referenced throughout the film, which is great, because there's nothing worse than a great main theme that's never used. Cough, cough, Black Panther, cough. So the next track, which stands out, is track 6, Sorrento Makes an Offer. Now, I'd say one of the weaknesses of this film is that it doesn't really have a villain theme. Having said that, Sorrento Makes an Offer is the closest we get to a villain theme on the score. It's okay, it's very, very dark and classic villain, which I guess is the point, considering this whole score is meant to be references the score. Not to its detriment, I might add. But, yeah, so we get a very, very dark, you know immediately it's the villain theme. But it is a nice cue, and yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say about that one. And immediately afterwards we get track 7, Welcome to the Rebellion. This is quite a nice, uplifting piece of music, with, I think, a rebellion theme in there. I think it's got its own motif. It does crop up occasionally, and I think it represents the rebellion in the film as a whole. Which is nice, and it once again references the Ready Player One theme as well. So yeah, just a nice track, really. And then the next one that stands out is track 9, The Orb of Osuvox. I'm going to go with Osuvox. This is the first good action cue of the score. It's one that's referenced in the end credits suite, which I'll get onto later. But it's a really, really nice action cue. And it's just reminiscent of all those 80s action pieces, like the end of Back to the Future or a lot of Indiana Jones, and flying around the Death Star in Star Wars. It's a lot like that, and it's really, really good as a result. And then we skip quite a lot of tracks, to be honest, and I'll get on to why that is when I do my overall review at the end, towards the end of this video. We skip a lot of tracks now to track 19, What Are You? Now this is a bit of a breath of fresh air for this score. It's different to the rest of the cues in the way that it's quite slow and emotional. Emotional is probably not the greatest word to describe this, and then not the rest of the score. The rest of the score is emotional, but this one is really quite emotional, quite moving, and it uses the Ready Player One theme again there in quite a slow and nice melodical way, and leads pretty much straight into track 20, There's Something I Need to Do, which builds up quite nicely into a very hopeful version of the main theme, as well as using the Rebellion theme, and it's the last track on the score before the main title and end credits, so it's very victorious and very kind of happy, and builds up into quite a nice climax to close up the film. So I've already talked about the main title, so we'll skip over that and go to the last track of the score, which is the end credits suite. Now, that definitely my favourite track of the score beside the main theme. It grabs all the best bits of the action cues throughout the score, of which there are many, and just makes them into a nice 8-minute long action piece, which is great. It's just 80s action style music, and I love it, I adore it. There's so many nice little pieces, as well as a lot of references to Back to the Future and films of that calibre. And overall, it's just a really nice piece of music to just sit down and listen to for 8 minutes. And it finishes up really, really nicely into an absolutely classic ending to a soundtrack. So, those are the tracks, the ones that stand out. You might have noticed I kind of went through them quite quickly. That's because I really want to get onto this bit of the review where I talk about the score as a whole. Now, I'm not going to lie, I was blown away by the score when I first heard of it. It's just, as I said, exactly the kind of thing we need right now in a world where 80s style score and that kind of orchestral music hasn't been heard in a very, very long time. So it's a nice breath of fresh air to have that again. And it's definitely that style of score that you're going to be listening to and going to be able to remember for ages after having seen the film. And there's a lot of James Horner and John Williams references in this film throughout it. Direct references with their themes and indirect references as to motifs and things like that. Now, speaking of references, this is a bit of a negative thing. There are a lot, and I mean a lot, of references to Back to the Future in this score, like you can hear them. If you've listened to Back to the Future score as much as I have, you can pick them out as soon as they happen. And they happen pretty much every other track, and I like them initially, but they're just used too damn much. The score should stand on its own and shouldn't have to rely on Back to the Future and already established amazing scores to hold itself up. And the thing is, it doesn't need to. The score is fantastic on its own, and the Back to the Future bits just feel, why are you here? You know? You don't need to be here. The score doesn't need to be held up by previous scores. It's great on its own. So, I suppose I should probably go into the negative parts of the score now that I've praised it for 10 minutes. I think my biggest problem with the score is the fact that it's, you know, with Back to the Future, you start off with the main theme, and then it builds up into an action cue, and then you have a bit of sad as you realise Marty is stuck in the past, and then it builds up into a bit of a love theme, and then goes for 11 minutes as an action cue at the end, and then becomes all epic again. This score doesn't really have that kind of structure. I would imagine that's probably down to the film more than the composer. But this film, the score for this film is pretty much non-stop action. It's a good 80 minutes of action cue. You know, it starts off kind of slow and then just goes off into the action cues. Takes a breath a little bit with the villain theme and Sorrento makes an offer. But otherwise it's non-stop action cue till the very end. In which point it then gets the end credit suite, which is just the best parts of all the action cues on the score. Now, the action cues are amazing, but it would have been nice to have had something else, you know, for just a little while. That's why I said with What Are You, track 19, it's a breath of fresh air, because it's the first kind of slow track, and you're like, finally, it's been an hour. Can we slow down a little bit? Action cues are great, but there isn't really a villain theme. It's just kind of dark, generic villain music. And there isn't really a love theme, and with these films, you kind of need a good love theme. Like, case in point, Back to the Future. For example, Superman, you know, all those scores have great action music, but they also have good love music to kind of balance out the soft and action, essentially. And this doesn't have that, it's just non-stop going and battling and things like that. And as I say, that may well be just because the film is like that. But yeah, another reason it could be as well is apparently 80s songs are used quite a lot throughout the film, so they may well fill in for some of the love themes and things like that. This is a shame, to be honest, but there we go. So those are the biggest problems with the score, I'd say, namely lack of variety. But having said that, the main theme for this score is amazing, and I absolutely adore it. Definitely one of the best main themes we've had for any film in recent years. The action cues are amazing, the end credit suite is particularly great, and all in, it's just a very nice callback score to a time when music was a lot more memorable. I know it's going to be kind of controversial to say that, but to be honest, I do think that the 80s was the best time for scores. Case in point, some of the Star Wars movies, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Alien, you know, there were a lot of amazing scores. And if you look at like top 10 scores or top 100 scores lists now, and you ask people what their favourite scores was, chances are they're going to tell you it's a score from the 70s, 80s, you know, that kind of era. Because that was the best time for scores. And Ready Player One is a callback to that, and it's just really nice to hear music like that again. So, to sum up, I'd say Ready Player One is the most memorable, fun-filled, epic, Star Warsy, Back to the Future style 80s score in the last 20 years. And to close the review, I will now give the Ready Player One score a score out of 10. I'm going to give it an 8. It's a great score, let down by a bit of repetition, but still pretty damn good, so 8 it is. So thank you very much for watching, and post your opinions and what you think below. Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Why? I'd love to hear what you think. And yeah, thank you very much. Goodbye.